My name is Natalie Brooks. I am 31 years old. 16 years ago, my mother left me alone for 10 days on my 15th birthday, with only a note on the fridge saying she would return when she was ready. Now in this crowded hospital waiting room in Kansas City, my father has just suffered a serious stroke, and my mother is demanding that I quit my job and move back home to handle all the family responsibilities, while my sisters agree without question. My heart pounds, but I know I will not let her control my life any longer. If your mother has ever tried to dictate your entire adult life, like it belongs to her, comment below with your story. I read everyone, and it helps me know I am not alone in this fight. The waiting room hummed with the low beep of machines and the shuffle of tired feet as I stood there trying to process what my mother had just said. My father, Paul Anderson, lay in the ICU a few doors down after the stroke hit him without warning earlier that afternoon. I had dropped everything at the distribution company where I worked as a logistics coordinator and raced over. My boss, Derek Ramirez, had texted me to take all the time I needed. He had been more than a supervisor to me over the years. Back when I was a scared teenager, he had been the neighbor who noticed the lights staying on too late and the empty fridge and quietly made sure I had groceries and a ride to school when no one else stepped up. My mother stood with her arms folded tight across her chest, her eyes locked on me in that way she had perfected over the years. The way that said she was in charge, and any argument would be a waste of breath. "Natalie, this is not up for discussion," she said, her voice carrying that calm authority she always used when she wanted to remind me of my place. "You are the one who can handle this. Your sisters have their careers and their families to think about. You quit that job tomorrow and move back into the house. That is what family does. I have always told you that." My older sister looked up from her phone and gave a small nod like the matter was already settled. "Mom is right, Natalie. You have always been the reliable one." My younger sister leaned in closer and added, "It is only fair. We all have to pitch in." I felt the words land like small cuts, the kind my mother had been making for years, in ways that felt almost normal until you stepped back and saw the pattern. This was not the first time she had tried to pull me back under her thumb. Over the last few years, she had called me at work to demand I cancel plans with my boyfriend because she needed me to drive her to appointments or watch the house while she went out with friends. She had shown up at my apartment unannounced to criticize how I spent my time and to remind me that my job was just a hobby compared to real family obligations. Each time she framed it as love as duty as the least I could do after everything she had done for me. And every time my father had backed her up in his own way sometimes, with a quiet, "Your mother knows what is best," or a sudden change of subject that left me feeling like the selfish one for pushing back. The doctor stepped out then and motioned my mother over for an update on my father's condition. While they spoke in low voices, I slipped into the hallway to catch my breath. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was my boyfriend checking in his text, simple and steady, asking if I needed him to come down to the hospital. I started to type a reply when my mother came around the corner, her face set in the same determined line I had seen 100 times. "Do not start making excuses, Natalie," she said before I could even speak. "I already told the nurse you will be the one handling the paperwork and the home care once he is discharged. Your sisters cannot drop their lives. You can. That is the arrangement." Her words were delivered with that cool authority that always made my stomach tighten, the same tone she had used when I was 15, and she had packed the car for the cruise without a second glance at me standing on the porch. I opened my mouth to tell her I had a life and a career I had fought to build, but before I could get the words out, my father's voice came weakly from the room behind us. He had heard enough of the conversation through the open door. "Your mother is right," he said, his voice raspy but firm, the kind of defensive outburst I had heard from him before when my mother laid down the law. "Family comes first, Natalie. Do not make this harder than it has to be." The words hit harder than I expected, the way he always seemed to side with her no matter what it cost me. My best friend Taylor had been texting me nonstop, offering to come sit with me and even bringing coffee if I needed it. She had seen this pattern play out before and knew how my mother could twist things until I started doubting myself. My boss, Derek Ramirez, had also messaged reminding me that my job was secure and that the team would cover my accounts for as long as I needed. But as I stood there, my mother pulled out her phone and started typing something, then looked up at me with a small, satisfied smile. "I just sent a note to your boss explaining the situation," she said. "It is better if they hear it from family. You will thank me later." The casual way she said it, as if my job and my boundaries were hers to manage, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. This was how it always started with her, the small violations that chipped away at my independence until I felt like I was back to being that 15-year-old girl waiting on the porch. I excused myself to the restroom just to get a moment alone. My hands were shaking as I splashed water on my face. When I came out, my mother was waiting in the hallway with a new look in her eye, the kind that said she had more to say, and she was not going to let me leave without hearing it. "There is something else you need to know about your father's condition," she began, her voice dropping to that intimate tone she used when she wanted to make me feel like we were in this together. "The doctor mentioned long-term care, and since you are here now, it only makes sense that you step up fully." The words hung between us, another small violation layered on top of all the others. I could feel the walls closing in the way they always did when my mother decided my time, my career, and my choices belonged to the family first. What she did not know was that I had already started to see the pattern for what it was, and this time I was not sure I could keep swallowing it down. As the nurse came back to check on my father, my mother turned to me one last time and said, "Call your boss tonight. Make it official." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my boss, asking if everything was okay at the hospital and whether I needed any paperwork for time off. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, when my mother glanced over and raised an eyebrow. "Who is that?" "If it is work, ignore it." "Family first. Natalie." The demand landed like another quiet threat, the kind that always seemed reasonable until it was not. I slipped the phone into my pocket without answering, the weight of her words pressing down harder than ever. Just then the doctor returned with more test results and motioned for the family to step into a private consultation room. My mother led the way, expecting me to follow without question. As we walked, I caught a glimpse of my sisters exchanging a look that said they were relieved it was me being asked to sacrifice everything again. The room felt smaller than it should have, the air thick with the scent of coffee and worry. My mother took the seat closest to the doctor and immediately began asking questions about home care arrangements, all while shooting me glances that made it clear she had already decided my role in all of this. I sat there listening, the old hurt mixing with a new kind of resolve. My mother had spent years eroding my sense of self, framing every boundary I tried to set as selfishness. But something about this moment in the hospital, with my father's health hanging in the balance and my mother's demands growing louder, felt like the point where the small violations could no longer be ignored. The doctor started explaining the next steps, and my mother leaned forward, ready to speak for all of us. Before she could, my phone vibrated again in my pocket, this time with a call from my boyfriend. I silenced it quickly, but the look my mother gave me told me she had noticed. "You can call him later," she said under her breath, the authority in her voice unmistakable. "Right now, we have more important things to discuss." The words were quiet, but they carried the same weight they always had, the same reminder that my life was not really mine as long as she had a say. I nodded because it was easier in the moment, but inside I felt the first real crack in the pattern I had been living with for so long. As the doctor continued talking about recovery timelines and support needs, my mother reached over and patted my knee like the decision was already made. The doctor wrapped up his update and left us to talk among ourselves. My mother turned to me immediately, her expression leaving no room for argument. "Call your boss in the morning," she said, her voice carrying that same calm authority she had used for years to shut down any pushback. "Tell him you are taking indefinite leave. We will need you full-time." My older sister and my younger sister nodded in agreement, but my mother was the one driving every word, making sure I understood this was not a request. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest as she leaned closer, her eyes narrowing just enough to deliver the jab she knew would land. "You have spent the last 16 years building this little career of yours like it matters more than us." She continued, each word precise and laced with that long-held resentment. "It is time to remember who raised you and who actually needs you now." The way she said it made my achievement sound like a childish distraction, as if my job as a logistics coordinator was something I had invented to avoid real responsibility. She had always framed my independence that way, turning every boundary I tried to set into proof that I was selfish and ungrateful. My father, still propped up in the bed with monitors beeping softly around him, suddenly let out a forced chuckle that cut through the tension in a way I had never heard from him before. "Come on, Natalie, your mother is only trying to keep the family together," he said, the laugh sounding too quick and too loud for the moment, like he was trying to smooth over the sharp edge of her demand. But then just as quickly he shifted, his voice dropping into something sharper as he looked straight at me. "Besides, if you had been checking in more these past few months instead of chasing those promotions, maybe this stroke would not have hit so hard." The words landed like a shock, completely different from his usual quiet agreement, and for a second the room went still as I processed the unexpected blame he had thrown at me out of nowhere. Before I could respond, the door opened and the hospital social worker, Dr. Elena Vargas, stepped back in her clipboard in hand as she introduced herself properly. She had kind eyes, but a no-nonsense tone that made it clear she had seen families like ours before. "We need to discuss discharge planning," she said, looking around the room. My mother immediately took control, cutting in before anyone else could speak. "Natalie will be handling all of that, doctor. She is moving back home to manage the care full-time, so you can direct everything through her." Dr. Elena Vargas glanced at me with a small frown, as if sensing the weight my mother had just placed on my shoulders without asking, but my mother kept talking, steering the conversation exactly where she wanted it. "She has the flexibility in her job, unlike her sisters who have real commitments." My phone buzzed in my pocket then, and I pulled it out to see a message from my boss asking for a quick update because a major shipping contract was on the line, and my absence was already causing delays. I started to type a reply when my mother reached over and placed her hand on my arm, the touch light, but the message unmistakable. "Whatever that is, it can wait," she said, her tone dropping into that intimate, controlling whisper she reserved for moments when she needed to remind me of my place. "Your family needs you more than some warehouse full of boxes ever will." The psychological jab hit deep, twisting my career into something trivial and selfish, exactly the way she had done when I first got the job 6 years ago, and she had called it a phase I would outgrow. My younger sister shifted in her chair and spoke up for the first time in a while. "Mom has been planning this for months, Natalie. She even looked up the company's family leave policy last quarter." The revelation came out casually, but it felt like a mini cliffhanger dropping right in the middle of the conversation, confirming that my mother had been laying the groundwork for this demand long before my father's stroke. My mother gave a small nod of approval, as if proud that her older daughter had backed her up so smoothly. I sat there absorbing the information, the pieces clicking into place in a way that made my stomach turn. Just then, my boyfriend walked into the room, his face tight with worry after racing over from work. He had been my steady support for the past 3 years, the one who reminded me I was allowed to have a life outside my mother's expectations. He greeted everyone politely but came straight to my side, squeezing my hand. My mother's eyes flicked to him with clear disapproval. "Brandon, this is a family matter," she said, initiating the next layer of control without missing a beat. "Natalie needs to focus on her father right now, not distractions." The way she called him a distraction carried that cold edge of resentment she had shown toward anyone who encouraged my independence, turning a simple visit into another reason I was failing the family. My father cleared his throat, then the forced chuckle from earlier completely gone, as he looked at my boyfriend and then back at me. "Your mother is right," he said, his voice gaining unexpected strength despite the monitors. "We have been carrying too much alone while you built your own little world." The outburst was shocking in its directness, nothing like his usual pattern of quiet agreement, and it left me reeling as my boyfriend's hand tightened around mine in silent support. Dr. Elena Vargas excused herself to give us privacy, but not before handing me her card and saying quietly that if I needed resources for caregiver support, she could provide options, a small lifeline. My mother immediately dismissed with a wave of her hand once the doctor was gone. The conversation moved to the cafeteria downstairs for coffee, my mother leading the way as always, and insisting I sit next to her so we could finalize the schedule. Once we were settled, she pulled out her phone and started listing the daily tasks I would need to handle once my father came home. Physical therapy appointments 3 times a week, medication tracking and meal preparation, she said, ticking them off like a checklist she had already memorized. "Your sisters will help when they can, but you are the one with no real ties holding you back." The words stung because they erased the life I had built, the apartment I paid for, the promotions I had earned, all reduced to nothing in her eyes. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from my boss. I stepped away to answer it, and his voice came through urgent. "Natalie, the client is threatening to pull the entire contract if we do not have coverage on your accounts by the end of the week," he said, the stress clear in his tone. "I can give you 2 weeks max, but after that we might have to make some hard calls." The news hit like another mini cliffhanger, the possibility of losing my position suddenly very real because of the pressure my mother was applying. When I returned to the table, my mother looked up expectantly. Who was that, she asked, her authority wrapping around the question like a command? I told her it was work, and she shook her head with that familiar mix of pity and control. "See, this is why you need to quit now. One less thing pulling you away from where you belong." Later that evening, after my father had been settled for the night, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway for what she called a private talk. "I know you think I am being hard on you," she said, her voice low but firm as she initiated yet another layer of pressure. "But you owe this family more than you realize. After everything I sacrificed to keep us together when you were younger, the least you can do is step up now." The jab referenced the past in a way that twisted history, making my teenage years sound like a burden I had placed on her rather than the other way around. My father, who had been dozing, suddenly stirred and overheard enough to add his own unexpected twist. "She needs to hear this straight," he said, his tone shifting into something almost aggressive before he caught himself and changed the subject to the weather outside, a deflection that felt calculated and new. The The night wore on with more texts from my mother, outlining exactly how my days would look. Once I moved back, each message another small violation that chipped away at the boundaries I had spent years building. My boyfriend stayed as long as he could, but my mother made it clear his presence was not welcome for the long term. This is not the time for boyfriends to play hero, she told me, when he left her words cutting deep into the one relationship that had given me strength. I felt the walls tightening further, the authority abuse wrapping around every decision until my own choices felt like they belonged to her. Then, just as I was about to head home for a few hours of sleep, my mother stopped me at the hospital exit with one final statement that hung in the air like a threat. "By the way, there is something about your father's medical bills you need to know," she said, her eyes locking onto mine with complete control. "The insurance is not covering everything, and since you are the one stepping up, we will need to discuss how your savings can help bridge the gap." The revelation dropped like a bomb I had not seen coming, another escalation that made it clear this demand for my time was only the beginning of what she intended to take. My mother stood there in the hospital hallway with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on me like she had already calculated every step I would take next. "The insurance gap is significant," she said, initiating the next layer of control without a single pause. "Your savings from that little job of yours will cover the deductible and the home modifications. It is only right after everything we have been through." The words carried that cold authority she wielded so well, turning my hard-earned money into something that belonged to the family the moment my father needed it. My boyfriend stepped forward, then his voice steady but concerned, as he suggested we talk to the insurance company first. My mother cut him off immediately. "This is not your decision, Brandon," she said, her tone sharp with resentment. "Natalie knows her place here. She has always known it." The psychological jab landed exactly where she wanted, reminding me that any support outside her circle was a threat to her authority. My older sister and my younger sister stood nearby, nodding along without adding much, but my mother was the one steering every word, making sure the pressure stayed on me alone. Just then, my coworker Carla Mendoza called my phone, her voice coming through when I stepped aside to answer. She had been covering my accounts at the distribution company and wanted to know if I could log in remotely for a critical client meeting the next morning. "We are holding on, but the team is stretched thin," she said, the worry clear. I told her I would try, but when I returned, my mother was waiting with that familiar look. Who was that she demanded, initiating yet another confrontation right there in the hallway? "If it is work again, tell them you are done. Your father's recovery comes first, and you are the only one who can make that happen without excuses." My father, who had been resting quietly, suddenly pushed himself up a bit in the bed when we stepped back into the room. His reaction caught everyone off guard. Instead of the quiet agreement I had expected, he let out a short, bitter laugh that turned into something almost accusatory. "You know, Natalie, if you had not been so busy chasing your own life these past few years, maybe I would not be lying here at all." He said the words sharp and shocking in their direct blame, nothing like the defensive outbursts I had seen before. It felt like he was unloading years of quiet frustration in one go, siding with my mother in a way that left the room stunned. My mother gave him a small nod of approval, as if his words confirmed everything she had been saying. The next few days blurred into a tense rhythm of hospital visits and late-night texts from my mother outlining exactly how my life would look once my father was discharged. She called me at odd hours to discuss schedules, always framing it as non-negotiable. "I have already spoken to the physical therapist," she told me one evening over the phone, her voice carrying that absolute authority. "You will handle the transportation 3 times a week starting next month. No arguments." When I tried to mention my job responsibilities, she laughed softly, the sound laced with contempt. That job has always been your escape, has it not? Time to grow up and contribute like the rest of us. My neighbor Harold Grant stopped by the hospital one afternoon with a casserole for the family, having heard about my father's stroke through the community grapevine. He had been a quiet support over the years, the kind of older man who mowed lawns for neighbors without being asked. He pulled me aside in the waiting room and said gently, "You look exhausted, kid. Do not let them run you into the ground." His words gave me a brief moment of clarity, but my mother spotted us talking and immediately walked over. "Harold, this is a private family matter," she said, initiating the dismissal with her usual control. "Natalie has enough on her plate without outside opinions." The pressure built like a slow burn over the following week. My mother sent daily updates about my father's progress and attached lists of expenses I would need to cover from my savings. One night, she called while I was trying to catch up on work emails from home. "The medical bills are piling up faster than expected," she said, her tone shifting into that intimate, guilt-laced authority she knew would wear me down. "Your sisters cannot help with the financial side, so it falls to you. It is the least you can do after all the years we gave you a roof." The jab twisted the past, making my teenage struggles sound like a debt I still owed her. My boyfriend tried to intervene during a family meeting at the house a few days later, suggesting we look into professional home care options. My mother turned on him instantly. "Brandon, you have no idea what this family has been through," she said, her words cutting deep with sarcasm. "Natalie understands loyalty, or at least she used to." The room went quiet, and my father, sitting in his recliner for the first time since the stroke, surprised us all again with his reaction. He leaned forward with unexpected energy and said, "Your mother has carried this family for decades, while you played independent. It is time you paid that back without the attitude." The statement was raw and accusatory in a completely new way, leaving me speechless as my mother smiled faintly in agreement. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, but my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I cannot do this anymore," I said. "I love my father and I want him to recover, but I will not quit my job or empty my savings or move back home. I have built a life that matters to me, and I am setting boundaries now." My mother's eyes widened, then narrowed as she initiated one last attack. "Boundaries," she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "After everything I have done for you, you are choosing yourself over your own blood. That is the thanks I get for raising you when no one else would." My older sister and my younger sister exchanged glances but said nothing, letting my mother lead the charge as always. My father shook his head in disappointment, his earlier outburst still hanging in the air. My boyfriend reached for my hand, but I could already feel the shift happening. Dr. Elena Vargas had given me resources earlier, and my coworker Carla Mendoza had offered to help transition my workload at the office, but none of it changed the reality of what I was about to lose. My neighbor Harold Grant texted me later that evening, offering a listening ear, but even his kindness felt distant now. I packed a small bag that night and left the family home for what I knew would be the last time in a long while. My mother called repeatedly, each message laced with authority and guilt, but I stopped responding after the first few. My father sent one text the next morning, a short note that carried the weight of his earlier blame. The silence that followed from my sisters felt heavier than any argument. I returned to my apartment alone, the space quiet in a way that echoed through me. Work continued, but the tension at family gatherings I used to attend out of obligation disappeared completely. My boyfriend stayed supportive for a while, yet the strain of my decision created cracks we could not ignore, and eventually we drifted apart too. I kept in touch with my coworker Carla Mendoza and my neighbor Harold Grant in small ways, but the isolation settled in like a permanent shadow. There were no dramatic confrontations or victories, just the quiet reality of having chosen myself and the loneliness that came with it. I sat on my balcony one evening months later, watching the Kansas City lights flicker in the distance, and realized this was the price of the boundaries I had finally drawn. My mother's authority no longer reached me, but neither did the family I had once tried so hard to hold together. The self-preservation felt necessary, even if it left me disconnected in ways I had not fully anticipated. I had walked away to protect the life I built, and in doing so, I had stepped into a quieter, lonelier chapter. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever set boundaries with family only to find yourself standing alone afterward, drop a comment and let me know how you handled the silence. It helps to know we are figuring this out together.